So if we continue our thinking about an IEP as an accommodation plan in human rights terms, the guidelines on accessible education say that there are three principles involved, and that is the dignity of the student to avoid stigma and stereotypes. So it's really quite wrong to produce IEPs that are the same for students who have the same exceptionality. Individualizing is important, getting beyond those labels and generalizations. And overriding principle is to promote inclusion through inclusive design, where everything about education is planned with students of all abilities in mind. That's the number one requirement of school systems. Where that has been incomplete, then the school system must remove barriers and after that accommodate any needs that remain. So an IEP is about, we're stretching it to talk about inclusive design and removing barriers in the overall system. Perhaps more traditionally an IEP was about the last point, accommodating remaining needs, but we're going to talk about how it can do all those things. And why is that important? Not just for students with disabilities. And a big breakthrough happened in Ontario in 2005 when the Ministry of Education put out a document called Education for All. And for the first time, in my knowledge, they talked about planning for inclusion. And they talked about exactly the same kinds of terms the Human Rights Commission had done the year before about universal design for learning and differentiated instruction as being available to enhance the learning of all students. But differentiated instruction you might equate with accommodating remaining needs. That it's kind of a universal design is you build everything about education, you plan all lessons with students of all abilities in mind, just as you would build a new public building so that no matter how a person moves, they could access it all with an equal kind of outcome. Differentiated instruction is more like building a ramp after the fact. But what Education for All talks about in general, and it's been very influential on faculties of education, and a lot of professional development's been done around the province, is that when you do build that ramp, what you're doing for the student with the disability is going to also help other students. So Education for All talked about what is necessary for some students to accommodate their disabilities is actually good for all students. It helps teachers respond to differences in learning styles. So Education for All was for students from kindergarten to grade 6. Learning for All has come out in 2009 from the ministry, extending all the way to grade 12. And there are three key principles in that document. It's really worthwhile reading these documents, and they give a lot of encouragement as far as not just getting our foot in the door for students with disabilities, but making sure that school is a good place for all kids. And Learning for All talked about particularly personalization and precision, which are key points tonight in talking about IEPs, that uniqueness, that individual nature of an IEP. And this document went further because it's talked about the moral purpose of personalizing and precision and teaching these things to teachers. And that is that what's necessary for some to accommodate disabilities may actually be better for all students. So back to the race course, education as a race or a journey. An IEP, we might think of it as a tool like MapQuest is a tool, or GPS in your car is a tool to get you from A to B effectively, to get you where you're going and efficiently get you there when you want to be there. An IEP can help everyone involved celebrate success, and an IEP is an important piece if we're assuming that education is about promoting employment opportunities for all students, no matter what challenges they have. Those with greater challenges are going to need more creative thinking, more people working for them to imagine and work towards that goal. So IEPs have to take you where you want to go. Just recently I had a newsletter from Kathy Snow, who writes Disability is Natural, web resources and speaks to groups around North America. And she's talked about thinking beyond goals to outcomes, beyond what we hope will occur, and also thinking about what really does occur. Because there can be negative effects, unintended effects, if we only think about short-term goals. We need to think about the longer-term goals and anticipate the big picture. And something she quoted a Turkish proverb, and I think it fits here in this notion of education as a race or a journey. No matter how far you have gone down a wrong road, turn back. So the Ministry of Education since 1998 has been trying to improve resources, improve IEPs. There has also been, they've experienced political pressure because the Auditor General of Ontario has monitored the situation with IEPs and found them very faulty, has made a number of recommendations for change. The Ministry has created its own template that it would merely suggest schools use. It does understand that some boards have long-term contracts with those software developers that created the IEPs based on the stereotypes about disabilities. So it's not forcing boards to use the Ministry template. The Ministry template itself has some flaws. It has no section for parent comments, for example, when that is a required part of an IEP process. The Ministry has created some sample IEPs which can be found at this link, and they're worth looking at because feedback is necessary. I find them very limited, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Limited in terms of looking at inclusion, and I'll provide some examples from that website. Since students of all abilities will be members of regular classrooms, we want IEPs to help the students learn and help the teachers teach. So we have to be careful about those unintended consequences, perhaps, of IEPs, or some of the going down the wrong road and the need to turn around, because we really must do better than the samples that the Ministry has provided. The Ministry's IEP Resource Guide from 2004 is found at this link. They are about to put out a new document, and that has not been reviewed by any advocacy groups. We haven't had any opportunity to see what's coming out. But there are some very helpful suggestions in this resource guide that I'll refer to. And from this point on in the webinar, we'll look at the key sections of the IEP itself. Go through the process kind of step by step, the paperwork step by step. So it will be helpful if you have one in front of you to refer to as we're talking. So the beginning section of an IEP, and they may vary slightly board to board, but the beginning section is always about is a student profile, some of the background information about the student. If the student has had an IPRC, is identified exceptional, there will be information from the IPRC meeting there. And it's important to make sure that the accurate information is reflected, that it's the same as what was written in the IPRC Statement of Decision. We need to be aware, though, that the Ministry has 12 exceptionalities which can appear in an IPRC decision as the identification. The Ministry's definition of developmental disability is incredibly awful. It says that a student is unable to benefit from special education programs designed for students with slow intellectual disability, with mild intellectual disabilities, and it's about limited potential for academic learning, independent social adjustment, and economic self-support. So when a student is labeled with a developmental disability, the system kicks in and says they can't learn, they don't have much of a future, career development is out of the question. Those things are all wrong. They've been proven wrong by many students who've had this label. They're very dangerous assumptions, but I'm really just mentioning this now because that's what starts an IEP process. The next information, if there has been an IPRC, there will be placement information. And the Ministry of Education suggests 5 types of placement wordings, so you should find one of those 5 on your son or daughter's IEP. Unfortunately, some boards don't use that terminology. They only say regular class or special class. Sometimes it doesn't correspond with the IPRC. The Toronto District Board, for example, does regular and special class in an IPRC decision and somehow comes out with one of these 5 when they turn to the IEP. So it can be problematic, and it's worth clarifying and knowing what the difference is among those 5 wordings of placement. Part of the student profile will be any available assessment data. And this is where it's important that this information be both accurate and helpful. And the Ministry of Education has created Ontario Student Record Guidelines, so that the file in the school office is called an OSR, and the guidelines tell you how you can that you can go in and look at that file as a parent. You can look at it. The principal will usually sit with you because the principal has legal responsibility to keep it safe, keep the information safe. But you can challenge the information that you find there. You can ask for it to be removed. There's an appeal process that every board sets up around this, because information in OSR should be removed if it's no longer accurate or, in their terms, is not conducive to the improvement of instruction. Now, I personally think that the whole definition of developmental disability is not at all conducive to the improvement of instruction. And you may have shared some health or other information for your child without realizing that it may prejudge people or lead them to the wrong conclusion, or it may have been information that was correct back when they were 3 and 4 years old, but is no longer correct when they're moving on to high school. You may want to clear it out of the file if it's going to be misleading or devaluing. Psychological assessments cannot be done without parental consent. And many of the tests that have been used, especially in the days when boards got more money through their diagnosis for dollars process, some of those tests would not be conducive to the improvement of instruction. Sometimes they weren't designed to be used for a student with these particular challenges. They may not be reliable or valid, and they're never designed to predict the future. So when if you have an IQ score on a psychological assessment that falls in the range that is recognized as a developmental disability, you're automatically getting a prediction of the future based on the IQ score. So those are all really dangerous assumptions to make about students. And just as we start out the planning process with the student information, it's a good opportunity at every IEP to review the information the school is looking at about your child.